So hello and good morning, afternoon, evening, depending on where you are in the world. This is Ruth from Curbal.com, and today we're going to continue our data security series. Today's topic is going to be GDPR. So I'm going to go through Microsoft's white paper on Power BI and GDPR. It is quite extensive. It's like 18 pages. Well, it goes through what GDPR is, how it applies for Power BI, what tools Microsoft provides you to help you comply to GDPR laws. Now, GDPR is not just for European companies and citizens. If you have business with European companies or if you collect European citizens' data, this applies to you too. So stay tuned. I recommend you grab a cup of coffee and we start. Okay, so this is actually a very interesting topic. I don't know how much you know about GDPR, but if you are a company and you are collecting personal data from EU citizens, this is very, very important for you. You need to comply with these rules that will start taking effect in 25th of May 2018. So Microsoft has put together this white paper where it goes through different aspects of the GDPR. Of course, this is not the only thing. I mean, it's not like I read this and then I know what to do to comply with GDPR law. No, it's more complicated than this, but this will get you, it is help for you to get started if you haven't. Make sure if you haven't that you get started right now, because it's complicated law and penalties for not complying to it are quite severe actually. So what is GDPR? GDPR is a law passed in the European Union for European citizens, and it basically gives our data gives the European Union the rights to manage their data, which is huge. There's no other law in the world that does this, and I think is, as a private person, as a EU citizen, I think is very, very good. As a data analyst, not that good, and as a company, even worse, because there's a lot of things that you need to do to make sure you comply with this. But what it basically does is actually gives back the European Union citizens the rights to their data. That means that I can call, after May 25th, I can call any company and I can ask them to either delete, modify, or remove the data they have collected on me, which is huge, huge, huge. Why is the European Union doing this? Well, there's been a lot of data breaches. There's been a lot of requests to actually being able to take back the data, you know, the rights to be forgotten. This is something that Google, for example, had to comply a few years ago, where European citizens have actually the right to call Google and say, I don't want that data to be available on your search engine. It's the right to be forgotten. And now with this new law, the GDPR, we are actually given the power to decide what happens with our data, with our personal data. So you as a company can actually collect data from European citizens, is no problem, but you have to first get consent, and then if they can revoke that consent at any time. So very, very important. If you fail to comply, you'll have severe penalties, especially if you're a big company, but also for small, of course. So if we go through the white paper, I have it here in front of me. It's so extensive that I really need to have some guidance and some help into this. But the implications of the GDPR, as I explained, in a second ago, is that we, the citizens of the European Union, have the right to our own data. We decide when it happens. That means that you as a company, or me as a company, has the responsibility. I'm accountable for managing your data properly. Okay, so I have to make sure that it's secure, and I have to make sure that I can manage your requests if you ask me to do something. Very, very important. If there is a data breach, I'm required now by law to report that. I have to report to you and to the authorities. And the penalties again are extremely severe in case you don't comply. So there are some key roles that the European Union has defined that you need to understand when implementing GDPR. There are 3 roles basically. You have the data subject role, which is basically European citizens and is the right to own our data and decide who to use it and where to store it, and if you have actually rights to use it or store it as a company. And then there are 2 rights that are very important, 2 roles more. Is the role of the controller and the role of the processor. So the role of the controller as a company is basically the responsibility, or you as a company, as a service provider, decide I want to collect this data about this citizen, European citizen, and you define the procedures and why you are collecting that. So that makes you a controller. You are actually mining for European citizens' data, and that makes you the controller. The processor is the part where the data is stored, is encrypted and secure. So sometimes you will be the controller and processor, sometimes you'll be just a controller. And for example, if you're using Microsoft Azure services, oftentimes you will have shared responsibilities with Microsoft to actually implement GDPR. And what this basically means is, let's say that you're using your services are on Azure. You're using, I don't know, you have a company that provides any kind of service in Azure to your customers. You define what data you collect, where you collect, so when you collect it, and what you're going to collect it for. That puts you in the role of a controller. But Microsoft, that is actually helping you store and manage and process and the transfer of data in rest, data in transit. We talked about that on the previous POWERBI data security video. They are the processors in that case. So you have to rely on Microsoft to actually encrypt, secure your data, report data breaches if there is any. And there you will have the shared responsibility between you and Microsoft. And I think they've made a great job here. They have, I will post a link also, they have actually defined this shared responsibility depending on the infrastructure that you have implemented for your services. So if it's infrastructure as a service, so platform as a service, or if it's, for example, if it's on-prem, this is this blue thing, you are the controller and the processor. But the more you get into Microsoft is managing things for you, they are also responsible to help you comply with GDPR laws. And this, I'm talking about Microsoft, but if you're using Google services or Amazon cloud services, they are responsible, okay? So this is what the role of the controller and processor basically is. Now, the GDPR laws are not the same for every company, and the reason, of course, is always that bigger companies have bigger responsibilities, the risk of data breaches are higher, and they have actually better possibilities to secure your data, where small companies, their limits could be, or their possibilities and capabilities could be limited. So they said that organizations defined as micro, small, medium-sized enterprises employing fewer than 250 people, they have other type of requirements. And it also has to do with the purpose. So, for example, I cannot, as a criminal, I cannot go and ask the government to delete my data because I am an EU citizen. So I break the law in the US and say, okay, I'm a EU citizen, delete my data. You can't do that, obviously. So there are certain purposes of storing data that you cannot overrule as a citizen. For example, I cannot go to my bank and say delete everything you have on me, because they are required by law to store banking information, okay, to avoid fraud and all that kind of stuff. So criminals are not going to benefit from this law, at least not for now. Maybe they find a loophole. But with that said, you have to, start looking at your business and say, what is my role? Am I a controller, or am I a processor, or am I both? And in that case, what things do I need to actually implement GDPR correctly? Before starting talking about Power BI specifically, one more thing: what is actually personal data? Personal data is basically data that is either identified or identifiable to a person. So identified, it means that in your systems it says Ruth Pozuelo Martinez, this is me. And if it says the security number, it's even worse, because then it's actually really me. So that is data that is identifiable to just, or identified to just me as a person. But then you have the identifiable data. That means that it doesn't really say my name, but is said indirectly. So you could say, like, owner of Curbal. It's me. I mean, who else? Or you are the CEO at Microsoft. Everybody knows who that is without saying the name. So that is the identifiable information. So if the data that you store in your database or in your systems can actually lead to an individual person, then that is protected by GDPR or subject to GDPR laws. So you have to take that into account. Then you have the possibility to mask your data. So you could have in your data sets, you have customers, and then you have customer ID instead of the actual name of the customer. And that is on a separate table. Well, if you do that, you have less requirements, but you still are obliged to follow GDPR law. But if you have completely unidentified data, that means you have the list of customers, you have the customer ID, but there is no table that relates the customer ID to the actual customer, so nobody can know who that customer is, then you're not obliged to follow GDPR law. Of course, you're going to tell me, Ruth, what's the point on that? I know, we want to know who our customers are when we're talking about data analysis. So what you need to do is to secure and protect your data to make sure that it is secure and European citizens have actually access to manage the data. So with that said, what data is stored in Power BI that could be subject to GDPR? There are actually a few categories. We have, this is from the white paper, this is what they said. They said, okay, there is, for example, customer data. All data including text, sound, video, image files, and software that you provide to Microsoft. That is customer data in Power BI that could be subject to GDPR. You have content that is a story. You could have, I don't know, SharePoint files, or you could have Skype conversations. You could have attachments that have sensitive data. You have to track those too. Administrator data. To be able to get access to a system, you have to identify yourself. So that information is subject to GDPR also. Payment data, of course, when you're paying for cloud services or Office 365 services, that kind of stuff. And then support data, this is a tricky one. So if a customer contacts you and say, okay, I need help with this case, and my social security number is, that is identifiable data on an email. You have to track that, which is hard. I know it's super hard. So those are the type of data that probably using Power BI you are actually storing, okay, and you need to make sure that it's secure and it follows GDPR laws. Microsoft has created a roadmap for how to actually manage GDPR, and I think it makes a lot of sense. They go through 4 steps. You will see it here. It says discover, manage, protect, and report. Okay. And discover is actually this step where you actually identify where you store personal information about European citizens. Nothing weird, right? To be able to delete and manage, you have to know that it's stored and where. You have the manage. Once you start storing information on European citizens, you have to have some kind of rules or governations how you're actually going to manage that, okay? So where you're going to store it, what are the procedures to access, to delete, you know, you have to manage the governance of your data. How are you going to make sure you comply with GDPR? Then you have to protect your data, okay? You have to make sure that it's secure, that it's encrypted, and then you have to report if there are security breaches. Really, really important. And again, depending if you are the controller and the processor, or the controller or the processor, somebody might be responsible of managing the breach, reporting breaches, for example. You have to be on top of that. If you're using Azure services, contact Microsoft or read the documentation they have available. They have tons and tons and tons of documentation available for you on how they secure and protect your data. But we're going to talk about some of them here. So when it comes to discover, when it comes to discover, search and identify personal data, in my opinion, there's a lot to be done. Nowadays, we know there's companies, we have data silos everywhere, right? Data is getting stored in all kinds of systems and it's not really accessible and discoverable. So this is a tricky one. This is really, really a serious tricky one, especially when you talk about support cases where, you know, you have engineers answering questions where personal information might be given to them. So when it comes to Power BI, you have the possibility to see what data has been stored in this app workspaces, okay? As an administrator, you can see the assets in the tenant. They say that in the future, you will be available to see all the assets, which is good. Which is not available yet, and I said it's like in 2019, mid 2018 or something. And then it says customers can store the Power BI assets in Office 365 and take advantage of the search options available there. I'm not so good at Office 365, so probably there's a lot of information somewhere about it. What they say is that Power BI, of course, does not control the underlying sources. So they know that you have this report, that report, that report, that report, but they don't know exactly what the data contains. We talked about that on the previous video, so go and check that out to see how data is stored in Power BI and what actually Microsoft has access or not to. So of course, if you are using that query, Microsoft has not access to the data at all, so they don't know what personal information you actually have available there. You have to do that work yourself. You have to go through all your sources and try to find them. When it goes to, you know, access and classify data, I've talked in another video about the Azure data catalog. It's not, in my opinion, like a super mature product, but it's a good step to actually having access to your data sources without having a massive data warehouse. I think the idea is absolutely brilliant. Make sure you check that video. But what it actually allows you is to have a data pool of your data sources, and then from there you can actually classify your data, your assets, your columns, and then you can actually see what personal identifiable data you have in there. Okay, so they say that they are going to do an update and they are going to release a new version of Azure Data Catalog. Don't remember exactly where I read it. That will allow you to control this easier in the very near future. Okay, which I'm very happy, because I think the Azure Data Catalog is very, very good. It's just lacking a few things to make it really, really powerful. And maybe this common data source for analytics or whatever it's called, that is the solution for this. I'm not really into that yet, so I'll have to do some research and then we can talk about it in another video. Okay, so let's move to the manage part of the GDPR process. One of the things you have to do in the manage step is to actually enable data governance practices. And for that, Power BI provides you with a set of tools that will help you to do that. The first thing is to manage who has access to what. We talked about it before. You have these app workspaces on Office 365. So you have the possibility to specify users and groups that will have access to a certain type of data, okay? And that's been there almost from the beginning. You have also the possibility to implement row level security that will allow you to restrict who has access to data even more. And if you're using analysis services, you have column security also. So there are a few tools available for you on that on that point. You have also the possibility to define or set who has the possibility to share the data, the reports. Okay, you have that as an admin. You can control if it's possible or not. Also, if it's possible to export data, if you can download the Power BI report or not. So you have a lot of control possibilities once the data is in PowerBI.com. You can control it quite intensively, actually. Another thing is that as a EU citizen, I have now, after May 25, the right to say, okay, delete my data or correct my data or move my data somewhere else. I have the right to do that, okay? And one of the things that Power BI allows you to do, you know, if you set the schedule refresh on PowerBI.com, every time somebody does something in the underlying source, if the data is actually refreshed, all the reports will update automatically, which means that you know that if changes have happened to the data source, they will be reflected. So if you deleted a user, that user will not be available on the reports anymore instantly. Well, depending on the schedule refresh you have, of course. If it's overnight or it's every hour, it will disappear, which is a great feature when it comes to GDPR. Also, Power BI user accounts are members of the Azure Active Directory that you can manage in a centralized way the data. If somebody calls it and say, okay, I've changed my name, or I want you to do this instead of that, or you can actually manage it in one place and it will propagate to any other service within Microsoft at least. When it comes to provide, one of the things I can do as a EU citizen, or will be able to do, is go and say, I want a copy of all the data that you have on me. And if you have data in Power BI, you can use export to Excel to actually download that data and provide it to your customer in a format that they can access to, which is part of the GDPR requirements. So this is a good thing. When it comes to restrict the processing of personal data, again, you have all these controls to see who has access to in Power BI. So you have, as an admin, a lot of possibilities to control how your data is visualized and who has access to what, which is absolutely fantastic. There is a requirement for GDPR, and is that you need consent. The client has to consent for you to use their data. And there is a possibility to have a custom login screen on Power BI where you can have your consent form there that says, okay, I'm using your data for this and that and this and that. And if you agree, just, sign this or accept the services, and that means that you agree. So lots and lots of tools to help you along with this process. When it comes to protection, Power BI complies with hundreds of standards. There is, I think it's in the Microsoft Trust Center, where you can see all the ISO standards there and US standards and Chinese standards and all the kinds of standards that Power BI actually complies with. So if you're interested in a particular one, just go there and search, but there's a huge list of standards that are available and Power BI is compliant to. And the data that is stored or in transit in Power BI is secure and is encrypted. And I talk very briefly about it in the video that I did last week on data security. Make sure you go and check it out, where we see what is stored and how it's stored, and then talk briefly on data encryption. But there is a white paper on data security where you can see all the details about it, okay, how it's encrypted and which methods there are used and how your data is being protected by Microsoft. Because in the process where Microsoft is a processor, they are the ones required to do that kind of security control. So when it comes to protect secure personal data, you have again the app workspaces. You can see with these auditing logs who has access what, who has removed that what, who has uploaded things. And you have a lot of control actually to see what's going on with your data. Again, you can restrict share, you can restrict download, so you have tons and tons and tons of tools available for you on Power BI to actually secure the data that you have in there. When it comes to detect and respond data breaches, this is Microsoft has a lot of securities in place to be able to protect Azure users from these data breaches. Okay, so this is just not Power BI, it's about how data is protected at Microsoft, and they have the security papers everywhere trying to explain how they are actually do this. And they are also talking about how they are actually testing their security measures so they can improve them all the time. The last part is manage audit trails, so the reporting part. So if something happens, you have to have documentation of how did you implement things, what did you do with the data, when you deleted, why you deleted, moved it somewhere, or so you have actually again the audit logs to help you document what you're doing in Power BI and what data is accessed to whom, and how you actually set up your environment to protect the data. Okay, so you have a lot of controls in the audit logs. I really recommend you to set them on. If you want me, I can do a video on audit logs. They are very, very good. You have tons and tons of detail there on what's going on in your Power BI tenant. For Power BI embedded, it's exactly the same. You have actually you're able to track and record Power BI API activities, so you will be able to see exactly the same things, the leads and gateways and who is accessing what, and you'll see. Then data moving in and out of EU. When you create a Power BI account, your data is stored, or is your tenant will be located in the closest data center that you have from where you created your Power BI tenant. So when you created your first Power BI account, if you was an employee, maybe it's on the wrong place. Go and check it out. If you go to powerbi.com, you have this question mark and then about, and then you will be able to see where your data is stored. But what they are doing, Microsoft, they are creating areas or regions. So you have European region, then you have a UK region. With Brexit, I guess it makes more sense than ever. And then you have all the regions. So when it comes with Europe, it's Europe region. So for example, if I live in Sweden, my data will stay within the European Union region. They are not guaranteeing that it will stay within Sweden. For the first, there is no data center in Sweden, so data is never there. But let's say my data was stored, I know it's stored in Ireland, for example, for my Power BI tenant, but because they have this 99% uptime, or whatever your uptime is, the contract with Microsoft is, it means that the high availability, they have to have mirror your data somewhere in another data center in case that the Irish data center goes down. Your data can be accessed from the German one, or to be able to provide a good performance for you. So your data will stay within the region. When it comes to the UK, they have 2 data centers in the UK, so they guarantee the data stays in the UK, which is a good thing with, again, Brexit. When it comes to track and record flows of personal data with third-party providers, this is very, very important. They say that Power BI customers are controllers. They are. We are. And it is our responsibility, the customer, to know what data these third-party services are using and for what. This is super important. So if you download a custom visual, okay, which is a third-party provider, there's some for Microsoft, and Microsoft things apply, but you have also custom visuals for third-party providers. You have to know what they do with the data. So you cannot just say, okay, I just use their service, I don't know what they do, they stole my data. You as a controller are responsible to know what they do with the data. So if you have European data privacy information on your database, you have to know what this third party is going to do with that, if anything. So you need to contact them. Microsoft says maintains an inventory of third-party services providers, but that's it. So the responsibility is yours, and that applies to anything. Every time that you are managing European data and you're using third-party services for, I don't know, email marketing like MailChimp or any other thing like Marketo, you have to contact them and you have to know what they do with the data. Because if they breach GDPR, you breach it too. It's your data. You are responsible for it. Okay? Yeah. So this is basically it. Well, this is a corporate format of what GDPR basically is. But again, this is a white paper. Go take a look. If you are unsure about what you need to do, you need to contact, I would recommend you to contact experts. The law, I mean, it's already too late, I would say, but you really need help to interpret what GDPR means for your specific business, for what you are trying to do. So make sure you comply, because again, the penalties are severe, and this is May 25th when they will apply. So you need to understand what's going on. Microsoft is helping you with a lot of tools, but still the responsibility as a controller is yours. You always have a responsibility, and sometimes you have a shared responsibility, as we talked in this video. Okay, so if you have any questions, let me know. If you would like me to talk about anything else about data security, let me know too. And have a fantastic day. And I'll see you on the next video on Friday. Take care. Bye.